Hi guys, so I'm going to read the next maybe few chapters of the BFG by Roald Dahl. Obviously this is all Roald Dahl's own work, I'm just reading it to entertain and for pleasure too. So the next chapter is called Snozzcumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelching tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-bunking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky poo vegetable. It is called the Snozzcumber. The Snozzcumber? Cried Sophie. There is no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we is not believing in giants, was we? Today we is not believing in Snozzcumbers. Just because we happened not to actually be seen something with our own two little winkles, we think it's not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. And the humblecrump. What's that? Sophie said. And the rapscraskle. The what? Sophie said. And the crumpscobble. Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not very know-it-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is absolutely know nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool? Sophie said. What I mean is what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a Snozzcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its girth and as a perambulator. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse novels. Here is the repulsant Snozzcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squabble it, despise it, desponge it, but because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky-poo Snozzcumbers instead. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and bones. You mean skin and bones? Sophie said. I know it's bones, the BFG said. But please understand that I can't be helping it. It is sometimes I is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my best all the time. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. Didn't mean to be rude. There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother? Cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you is knowing that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Who ever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving the Snozzcumber around his head like a lasso. There never was a wooden giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself getting a little muzzled. In that case, she said, how were you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears, and that is all there is to it. They simply appear the same way the sun and stars. And when did you appear, Sophie asked? How on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old and crumply. Perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when the giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes and quite suddenly a giant is disappearing and nobody ever knowing where he goes to. But mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whipsy time fiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome Snozzcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end into his mouth and a bit off a huge hunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like the crunching of lumps of ice. It's floating, he spluttered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of Snozzcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgracious, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable. It's rotten. It's maggot-wise. Try it yourself, this foulsome Snozzcumber. No, thank you, Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snipsy little winkle, have a go. Sophie took a small nibble. Ah, she spluttered. Oh no! Oh gosh, oh help! She spat it out quickly. It tastes of fudge skins, she gasped, and rotten fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. To me, it's tasting of cockroaches and slime language. Do you really have to eat it? Sophie said. You do, unless it's wanting to become so thin you'll be disappearing into thin air, Sophie said. A thick air is something quite different. Once again, that sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. Words, he said. I is all such a tickling problem to me in my day life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop scribbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I'm wanting to say, but somehow or other they is always getting squish-snoggled around. That happens to everyone, Sophie said. Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I am speaking of the most terrible Wiglish. I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said. You do? Cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. You really do? Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you was not twiddling my leg? Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk. How wondercrumps, cried the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie spunkers. How absolutely squiffling. I is all a stutter. Listen, Sophie said, we don't have to eat Snozzcumbers. In the fields around our village there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflowers and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting? The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. I is a very honourable giant, he said. I would rather be chewing up rotten Snozzcumbers than snitching things from other people. You stole me, Sophie said. I did not steal you thank you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you is only a tiny little girl. The Bloodbottler. Suddenly a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt? Look out, cried the BFG. It's the Bloodbottler. But before he finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten Snozzcumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. Who was you jabbling to in here just now? He boomed. I was jabbling to myself, the BFG answered. Fizzle-whiz, shouted the Bloodbottler. But, Wallop, he boomed. You is talking to a human being. That is what I is thinking. No, no, cried the BFG. Yes, yes, blew Butter. I is guessing you has snatched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winking it out and guzzling at an extra snatch for my supper. The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one in here, he stammered. Why don't you leave me alone? The Bloodbottler pointed a finger, and large as a tree, trunk at the BFG. Runty little scum screwer, he shouted. Piffling little swishwiggler, squimpy little blobwort, prunty little podswizzler. I is now going to search the primroses. He grabbed the BFG by the arm. And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being, he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous Snozzcumber, watching two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Bloodbottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-pink. There was a black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair was on his head, was as long and dark as tangled. His foul face was round and squashy looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying on top of each other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran over the chin. It was not the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Bloodbottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your piddling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings, and you is dotty as a dog's waddler," cried the Bloodbottler. Soon the Bloodbottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself. He was bound to search the tabletop, but he couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The Snozzcumber, although it was thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the Bloodbottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff, taking care to stay out of sight. Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the Snozzcumbers large enough for her to crouch in so long. As she rolled herself up into a ball, she crawled into it. It was wet and slimy hiding place, but what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The Bloodbottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the Bloodbottler grabbed the half-eaten Snozzcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. "Sophie, where is she?" he thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table, so where is you hiding, Sophie?" "So this is the filthy rots and garbage you was eating," boomed the Bloodbottler, holding up the partly eaten Snozzcumber. "You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash." For a moment the Bloodbottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off track. "That is the scrumdiddlyumptious Snozzcumber," he said. "I is guzzling and gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a Snozzcumber, Bloodbottler?" "Human beings is juicier," the Bloodbottler said. "You is talking rummy tot," the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the Bloodbottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetables, the sheer foulness of its flavour would send him bellowing out of the cave. "I is happy to let you sample it," the BFG went on, "but please, when you see how truly gumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchit for my supper." The Bloodbottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the Snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. "You is not switch-fiddling me, is you?" said the Bloodbottler. "Never!" cried the BFG passionately. "Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting out, 'Oh, how scrumdiddlyumptious! This is Wondervedges.'" The BFG could see the greedy Bloodbottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. "Vegetables is very good for you," he went on. "It's not healthsome always to be eating meaty things." "Just this once," the Bloodbottler said. "I is going to taste these rots and eats of yours, but I is warning you that if it's filsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head." He picked up the Snozzcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some filthy feet in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, "Don't!" but that would have been even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the Bloodbottler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clumping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed in quickly. "Ew!" roared the Bloodbottler. "Ew! Each!" And then he spat. All of the great lumps of Snozzcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. "You little swine bugler," roared the Bloodbottler. "You pig's willer." He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the Snozzcumber over his head. Fragments of filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it? Yelled the Bloodbottler. This is the most disgusting taste that is ever clutching my teeth. You must be bubbles to be swallowing slush like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beings. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. Aye, it is ghastly and gumtrous, shouted the Bloodbottler, and tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble a few human chili beans. You is wishing to know why I is choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the Bloodbottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important I has plenty of cold eats in this scuddling hot weather, and the next coldest thing is to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beans from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, said the BFG. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school chidlers, the Bloodbottler said. I is very fond indeed of English school chidlers. They has nice inky booky flavour. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said, and you is an insult to the giant people, shouted the Bloodbottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a pibbling little pipsqueak. You is a cree puffnut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I am so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what happened. And there I was telling him to eat that filthy Snozzcumber, and you was all the time inside it, the BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chidler, cried the BFG. He was all covered in Snozzcumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up as best as he could. I is hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like. What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them every single one. Oh, I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can think up a way of doing it. Hey, the next chapter is called Frobscottle and Whizzpoppers. I've just looked, it's a bit of a short one, so I'm going to read this and finish there. Frobscottle and Whizzpoppers. By now, Sophie was beginning to feel not only extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. Had she been at home, she would have finished her breakfast long ago. Are you sure there's nothing else to eat around here except those disgusting smelly Snozzcumbers? She asked. Not even a Winkle, answered the big friendly giant. In that case, may I please have a little water? She said. Water? Said the BFG, frowning mightily. What is a water? We drink it, Sophie said. What do you drink? Frobscottle, announced the BFG. All giants is drinking Frobscottle. Is it as nasty as your Snozzcumbers? Sophie asked. Nasty? Cried the BFG. Never is it nasty. Frobscottle was squeaked and jumbling. He got up from his chair and went to the second huge cupboard. He opened it and took out a glass bottle that must have been 6 feet tall. The liquid inside it was pale green, and the bottle was half full. Here is a Frobscottle, he cried, holding up the bottle and proud and high, as though it contained some rare wine. Delumptious, fizzy Frobscottle, he shouted. He gave it a shake, and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, it's fizzing the wrong way, Sophie cried. And indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of travelling upwards and bursting on the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. A pale green frothy fizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning the wrong way? Asked the BFG. In our fizzy drinks, Sophie said, the bubbles always go up and burst at the top. Upwards is the wrong way, cried the BFG. You mustn't ever be having bubbles going upwards. That's the most flash, bunking rubbish I is ever hearing. Why do you say that? Sophie asked. You was asking me why, cried the BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though he were conducting an orchestra. You is actually meaning to tell me you cannot see why it's a squatty mistake to have the bubbles flying up instead of down. You said it was flash bunking. Now you say it's Scrotty. Which is it? Sophie asked politely. Both, cried the BFG. It is flush bunking and Scrotty. Mistake to let bubbles go upwards. If you can't see, why you must be as quacky as a duck hound. By Ringo, your head must be so full of frog squinkers and buzzwangles. I is frithered, if you know how you can think that at all. Why shouldn't the bubbles go upwards? Sophie asked. I will explain, said the BFG. But tell me first, what name is you calling your Frobscottle by? One is Coke, Sophie said. Another is Pepsi. There are lots of them. And all the bubbles is going up? They all go up, Sophie said. Catastrophe, cried the BFG. Upgoing bubbles is a catastrophe. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you will listen carefully, I will try to explain, said the BFG. But your brain is so full of bug whiffles, I doubt you will ever understand. I'll do my best, Sophie said patiently. Very well, then. When you is drinking this cocky drink of yours, said the BFG, it is going straight down into your tummy. Is that right, or is it left? It's right, said Sophie. And the bubbles is going also into your tummy, right or left? Right again, Sophie said. And the bubbles is fizzing upwards. Of course, Sophie said. Which means, said the BFG, that they will all come swishing up your throat and out your mouth to make a false belchy burp. That is often true, Sophie said. But what is wrong with a little burp now and again? It is sort of fun. Burping is fearsome, said the BFG. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said, what was it you called it? Frobscottle, said the BFG. With Frobscottle, Sophie said, the bubbles in your tummy will be going downwards, and that could have a far nastier result. Why nasty? Asked the BFG, frowning. Because, Sophie said, blushing a little, they go down instead of up. They'll be coming out of somewhere else with an even louder and ruder noise. A Whizzpopper, cried the BFG, beaming at her. Us giants is making Whizzpoppers all the time. Whizzpoppers are a sign of happiness. It is music in our ears. You surely is not telling me that a little whiz-popping is forbidden among human beings. It's considered extremely rude, Sophie said. But you is whiz-popping, is you not, now and again? Asked the BFG. Everyone is whiz-popping, if that's what you call it, Sophie said. Kings and queens are whiz-popping. Presidents are whiz-popping. Glamorous film stars are whiz-popping. Little babies are whiz-popping. But where I come from, it's not nice to talk about it. Redonkulous, said the BFG. If everyone is making whiz-poppers, then why not talk about it? We is now having to squiggle out this delicious Frobscottle, and you will see that happy result. The BFG shook the bottle vigorously. The pale green stuff fizzed and bubbled. He removed the cork and took a tremendous gurgling swig. It's glummy, he cried. I love it. For a few moments the big friendly giant stood quite still, and a look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his long wrinkly face. Then suddenly the heavens opened and he let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated around the walls of the cave like thunder, and the glass jars rattled on their shelves. But most astonishing of all, the force of the explosions actually lifted the enormous giant clear off his feet like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried, and then he came down to earth again. Now that is whiz-popping for you. Sophie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of the enormous bottle towards her. Don't you have a cup? Sophie said. No cups, only bottle. Sophie opened her mouth, and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous Frobscottle down her throat. Oh gosh, how delicious it was! It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream, with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavour, and the bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting around her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing a jig inside her and tickling her with their toes. It was lovely. It's lovely, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG, flapping his ears. Sophie could feel the bubbles travelling lower and lower down her tummy, and then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. The trumpet sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of the music and thunder. Bravo! Shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. You is very good for a beginner. Let's have some more. And that's where I'm going to stop it, guys. So the next chapter will be called Journey to the Dream Country. But I am going to pause it there. We've read at least 20 pages today. So thank you again for listening and goodbye.